I spent almost a decade as a speech therapist in a system that told me that progress for autistic kids looked like quiet hands, sitting still, and 80% accuracy. But deep down, I knew something was off. I watched my students spend their days in a constant state of dysregulation, all because the system wasn't built for them. And honestly, I was burning out too. So I made a choice. I walked away from compliance-based therapy and built a practice where connection, trust, and safety come first. And with that, the burnout cleared and was replaced with the joy of seeing autistic kids truly thrive. And now, I'm on a mission to help you do the same. Welcome to Let Them Lead, the child-led autism podcast, where we rethink everything we thought we knew about supporting autistic kids. I'm Nicole Casey, the child-led SLP, and if you're ready to start supporting autistic kids in a way that's effective, affirming, and actually feels good, you're in the right place. Let's unlearn, relearn, and redefine what progress really means together. It's time to let autistic kids lead. Welcome back to Let Them Lead. I am really excited to jump into today's topic with you because it's a juicy one, if I do say so myself, because I'm going to tell you about the times over the course of my career where I've been called out or I've been made to feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And there's a reason. I'm not just telling you this to talk some crap and, tell you about all the times where I've had a hard time, but I'm really telling you this because I do think that when we shift into a new way of doing things, whether it's here where we're all trying to evolve into this more child-led approach or in anything in life, like whenever we try something different, there will be people who question us. And I think that for a lot of us, that fear of judgment or that fear of being questioned might be a barrier for actually stepping into this approach and really going for it. And I know that it was definitely something that I worried about in the past and something that actually came to fruition a few times. And now that it's been years, I can talk about it pretty neutrally. Like I know that it was tough when these things did happen, but I hope that by sharing with you some of these examples that you'll be able to see that you can get through it. If somebody does question how you're showing up for your autistic students or your child, you can get through it. We've done harder things. We will do more difficult things. And, having the tools and the confidence in why you're doing what you're doing is really all you need to handle situations like that. So let me tell you about the first time I was ever called out for my approach and how it went down. When I was in grad school, I did a clinical placement at a school for autistic students, and at the end of that placement, they actually offered me a position. I was still in grad school, but they needed somebody to be a long-term sub for one of their SLPs who was going out on maternity leave, and it was around the end of the school year, so they were looking for me to come and see her kids during their extended school year program, basically their summer school. And I obviously was not an SLP yet. I was still in school. So I did what's called emergency certification, which I don't remember all of the things that were involved in it, but I remember there were certain qualifications, like a certain number of college credits in certain fields and things like that, that could qualify you to be eligible to get this emergency cert. And it wasn't like you would get this certification and then never have to eventually become an SLP. It was like a very specific set amount of time. So I was able to be emergency certified for, I want to say 30 or 60 days. And so during that time, I was seeing kids at that school as their speech therapist. I obviously had very little experience, so I was really relying on the other professionals around me to support me, to help me to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. But because I had been there for an entire semester already, I felt pretty comfortable. So that first week or so, I kind of got acclimated with kids that I would be seeing, and there were a couple that I was just getting to know who I saw in a group. And so I was supposed to take them down to this little closet-sized room, and it was usually a struggle to get them to transition. And then once we would get to speech, there would be another struggle in that they didn't really want to participate. It was like they had a hard time. And it was like one child would struggle and then everybody was kind of dysregulated in the session. And the one thing that the child really did not want to do was sit in his chair at the table. And I remember thinking, like, I don't care if you sit on the moon, as long as you are here and present and you feel like you can engage. I don't care where you sit. Like, you can sit anywhere you want. I don't mind. And so I remember just saying to him, well, you don't have to sit on your chair. If you want to stand, you can stand. If you want to jump, you can jump. If you want to sit on the floor, you can sit on the floor. And he said, okay, I want to sit on the floor. And he did. And then, after a minute or two, the other kids were like, well, I want to sit on the floor. I want to sit on the floor. And I'm like, okay, let's all sit on the floor. So we did our entire session under the table that was in the room, and it went great. Everybody was engaged. Everybody was participating. And I want to say it was our best session because I was just honoring what they needed in that moment. And looking back, it's like, was that a regulation thing for that child? Or maybe it was like a control thing. Like, I don't want to sit at the table. It's not necessarily because of the table or the chair, but more so that I don't want to do something that you're making me do. And either way, it didn't matter to me. I was like, the fact of the matter is that I just want you to have a beneficial time here in therapy. So if that means we're sitting on the floor, then we're sitting on the floor. I'm not worried about it. So we had a great session. Everybody was making, strides towards connecting and engaging. And I took them back to their classroom and dropped them off. And then the next time I went to get them a few days later, the teacher pulled me aside as I came to pick them up and said, Johnny told me that you let them sit on the floor during your session. And I said, yeah, I was kind of excited to be like, yeah, I did. It was actually like, really helpful. Everybody participated. And she said, well, that's unacceptable. And we don't sit on the floor. We sit in our chairs. And I remember just thinking like, oh, okay. Got it. And I was really taken aback because in my mind, we had had this great session and it was such a success. And who cares if we sit on the chairs? But apparently it was unacceptable and it wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. So then I took the kids to our session and I was trying to get them to sit in their chair. And I didn't even know why. I'm like, I don't really know why we're going to be, so dead set on sitting in a certain seat. But apparently that's the rules. And I didn't like it, but I was like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I'm not even a real speech therapist yet. I'm just here. And so we struggled through the next session. And I knew it wasn't logical and I knew that it didn't make sense, but I felt like I was so unsure of myself and insecure about the way that I was supporting these kids to begin with. Like, I really didn't know what I was doing. So I felt like I needed to defer to the professionals who were telling me what to do. So I spent the next, few days or week trying to plan something for the next session that would get us back to that place of being able to engage. And I thought that one of the things that I knew that they liked to do was to move their bodies. Like, I knew that part of sitting on the floor was that they got to do something unexpected and novel. But the other thing was that I think they were kids who needed some movement. So I thought, okay, what can we do to honor that and not sit on the floor, So I picked them up and instead of going directly to our closet space, I actually took them for a walk. We stayed in the building. Like, we did not leave the building. We walked up and down the hallways and we did a scavenger hunt. I had made these printed sheets that had different places that we were looking for, different things that we were trying to find on our scavenger hunt. And I thought that giving them the movement paired with the language tasks that we were working on would be a good way to kind of make everybody happy. Everybody would win, right? The other thing that I thought was so cool about the scavenger hunt idea is that they were getting to lead me around the school. So we were kind of giving them some of the power. They were in charge, and they were also getting to do really important and meaningful things with their language, like direct me to find the bathroom. You know, I remember one of the things on the scavenger hunt was like, what if I'm thirsty? Where should I go? Or what can I do? And then they would help me to find the water fountain. So it was just like very functional and also very child-led and fun. And again, a great session. We had the best time. Everybody did what they were supposed to be doing, and we were engaged. So I took them back to their classroom, and instead of being greeted like another adult, I was actually reprimanded in front of everybody. And the teacher said, "Where were you? You weren't in your room, and you need to take them directly to that room. You can't be going somewhere else with them." Like as if I took them to, McDonald's. And I remember at the time, even though I was a student and I was unsure of myself, I just remember thinking like, this is not right. Like, you don't get to yell at me, especially in front of kids, but you don't get to talk to me like this. But of course, because I was new and I didn't know what I was doing and I felt uncomfortable, I just said, "Oh, okay. Sorry about that." And I left. And I remember I cried. I was really, really hurt and embarrassed. And I thought, obviously something's wrong with me. If I keep thinking these things are great ideas and if I keep thinking they're helping the kids make progress, but every time I try something different, I get, told off, like maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And I went home, I talked to my family, and they were like, "You know what? You're right. You need to say something. Like you have to work there for the next couple weeks. She can't do that again. You need to say something." So I did. I actually mustered up the confidence. I went into her room before school started and I said, "Look, I am just trying to make an impact and really help the kids. And if there's things that you don't agree with or you'd like me to do differently, I just would appreciate you pulling me aside and telling me them in private, not in front of the kids, because I feel like you undermined my authority and kids need to be able to trust that I'm like a sturdy leader for them, that, all of that kind of stuff." And I remember she kind of gaslit me into thinking that she didn't actually do what I was saying she did. She's like, I'm sorry. I was just flustered. I didn't really think that I reprimanded you, but, next time just let me know where you're going. And I'm like, yeah, we did eventually go to that room. We just took a little bit of a longer route to get there so that we could do this activity. And we kind of just left it at that. And I remember walking out and thinking okay, I still don't feel great about myself, but at least I did stand up for myself slightly. And I think that interaction really kind of gave me a dose of reality that not everybody in the field and not everybody who is working with kids is going to agree or view things the same way as I do. And it kind of got me thinking and lit a fire under me to always do what I think is best and to start to question the rules that are in place and the way that we've always done things just because that's how they've always been done. And it's kind of hard for me, if I'm honest, because I, in my personal life, even from childhood and now as an adult, I am a rule follower. If I know that there's a rule in place, I am going to follow it. I don't like to break the rules. I'm not a rebel. I follow the rules, but I feel like I follow the rules when they make sense and I understand them. If I feel like a rule is in place and it's not actually serving anybody, then I'm likely to not enforce that. And that's how I felt about the sitting in the chairs moment. It's even thinking about the quote unquote real world when it comes to supporting our kids, we're well, we need to be preparing them for the real world. They need to sit on their chairs. And I think about that and I'm as an adult, half the time I sit on the floor, or right now, for example, and most of the time I'm sitting at my desk, cross-legged, shoes off, so the real world is not sitting with their feet on the floor at 90-degree angles in a chair. That's really not how the real world looks. And so it's okay to question the way that things have always been done. And I think that in looking back on that exchange with that teacher, I don't think that it was really a reflection on me or my ideas, my skills, the way that I might have thought back then. I think it really was her projecting her own, bad mood or bad day onto me. And some people are going to be so set on following the way things have always been done that they'd rather the rules stay the rules and keep enforcing them than shift and pivot to something that will ultimately help the kids more. And I think that's a tough thing for me to understand, because it's like, so we had our best session ever. The kids actually did what we know they need to do in order to make progress. We all connected. They were happy to come. There was no dysregulation. Nobody was having a hard time, because we kind of co-constructed the session, right, by letting them decide where they wanted to sit. And so we had the best session. We made the most progress, but you're not happy because they didn't sit on their chairs. So it's more important for you that they're compliant with the rules, even if the rules don't really make sense, than you are about them making progress. Like that, to me, that mindset will never be one that I can understand. So looking back on it, I just think that's where this person was coming from. They didn't understand the merit in letting kids lead. And so at that time, when I got called out by this person, I didn't have the confidence and I didn't have a way of describing this the way that I do now. So yes, it definitely shook me then. But if that happened to me today, I think I would be able to handle myself a lot differently. And there definitely have been people who have rolled their eyes at my approach, or who have questioned if what I'm doing actually makes sense, or have critiqued it to say that I'm not actually setting kids up for success if I'm just letting them think they can run everything. And so we'll get into later in this conversation, we'll get into my response to those things, and I'll give you some strategies for handling these conversations if they come up for you. But let me tell you about this other time where I was completely caught off guard and called out. So I had this student who really loved pressing the buttons on the microwave in his classroom. And it was just something that we just like accepted about him. It's like, oh yeah, he likes to press the buttons on the microwave. Like whatever floats your boat, right? And of course there were boundaries in place to keep everybody safe. Like we weren't going to let him microwave metal, or like burn something. But when it was time for lunch, we had him be the microwaver. Like he got to put everybody's lunches in the microwave and heat it up. And he loved that. Like that was his thing. And we let him set the timer on the microwave. Like there were definitely ways that he was able to play with the microwave that also were a part of our routine. And because he liked those buttons so much, I knew that it would be helpful to find something that we could do together in our sessions that would give him kind of that same input. But none of the toys that we had or the activities that we had really had that same vibe for him. And so he wasn't into it. But there was this one day where I was out shopping at like Marshall's or one of those stores, and I saw this toy microwave, and it wasn't like a clunky plastic one. It was like one where the buttons were actually pretty similar to a real microwave. And I immediately bought it. I was like, yes, done. I'm taking this. I can't wait to see his face. So I brought it to school and we played with it in our sessions. We pretended to microwave food. We made pretend food for other people. We were putting Play-Doh in it to microwave and pretend it was cookies and stuff like that. And he was having the time of his life. Like we were taking orders. It was so successful. He loved it. And it was something that really allowed him to connect with me and vice versa based on his deep interest in these microwave buttons. And so we were all feeling really good about it. And I remember just thinking like, yeah, this is what it's all about. Like we need to be leaning into kids' interests. So imagine my surprise. And I'll never forget it. It was a Friday afternoon. It was like 2:30 p.m. And I was wrapping up my paperwork, trying to get out of the office for the weekend. And a woman came over to my desk and she said, "Are you Nicole?" And I said, yes. And she said, "I am so-and-so. I am your student's behavior therapist." She was, I guess, his BCBA. And she wanted to talk to me about how he was doing in speech. And I thought, oh, great. I love to connect. I love to collaborate. Awesome. And she said, "Now I need to start off by telling you that there's something that you're doing that has to stop. And it's just not going to work. And it's causing a lot of problems." And I'm like, what? Have you gotten the wrong person? Like what? like, I think if you would have said, I'll give you $1 million if you know what's going to come out of her mouth next, I would have been like, I can't, I have no idea. And she goes, it's that toy microwave that you've introduced. And I'm like, what's the microwave got to do with this? And I was like, oh. And she says, yeah, we're not trying to encourage him to play with the microwave. Like, you need to stop using that play microwave with him. And I remember just like, I couldn't even believe my ears or my eyes. I'm like, are you kidding? It's a toy and we use it during play. But at the time, again, I was early in my career and I'm thinking, wait, am I doing something wrong? Like, is this not a good thing to do? And so she says, we don't let him look at the microwave or touch the microwave or do anything with the microwave. And so we definitely don't want to be buying toys that encourage him to want to play with the microwave. Like, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, well, we've been playing with this toy microwave for weeks at this point, and it has not caused an increase in him trying to use the microwave. In fact, I feel like maybe the opposite might be true. Like, he's more into the toy one than he is the real one because it's fun to play with and he can have it whenever he wants. So I don't know how these are related. Like, what does this have to do with it? And her point was that by me getting him this toy microwave, that he was going to feel like he had free range to play with their real microwave at home, and it was going to be dangerous. At the time, I felt very like ambushed by this person, and I remember I just thought to myself, like, I don't know how to explain why I think that I'm right, and I also feel very attacked. So I just remember thinking, like, okay, like, I understand, thank you for letting me know. And then she left and I of course cried. But now looking back on it, I think there was a few issues and a few things that I wish that I would have said in that moment. Number one, I think we need to give kids more credit that they can tell the difference between a toy microwave and the real microwave, and that we can set boundaries and enforce our boundaries and keep everybody safe, but we can still lean into deep interests like buttons on a microwave. And I wish that those were the things that I would have came back at her and said, but that's what I would respond with today. I would say, well, I believe deeply and firmly in leaning into kids' interests. So to me, this is just a way of honoring him and what he enjoys and what brings him joy. And, we've actually seen a lot of progress in his engagement and communication since we've started to follow this interest and play with the toy. And so I do think that would have been my response back then, but it wasn't. I didn't have the tools or the confidence that I have at this point. And so I didn't. And listen, we still used the microwave. And thinking back on it, I just think that's another example of somebody who, instead of enforcing a kind boundary with a child and explaining it to them because they presume competence and they believe that the child has the capability of understanding the boundary and learning to keep themselves safe, they just decided that they were going to completely rid the environment of the thing that brings the child joy, because that's an easier way to get compliance than to, quote unquote, confuse him. So that was the second time probably not the second time, but that was the second big time that I remember being questioned and being really shaken up by it. And I started to think, am I doing things incorrectly? Okay, so now that I've shared these two moments, also, clearly, I don't let things go, right? I mean, the fact that I can talk about these situations in detail 12 years later is actually wild, but I'm glad that I can, because now we can use them as a learning experience together. So while these two examples were probably a little bit extreme, I do think that they're helpful to hear because they just remind you that not everybody will agree with our approach and not everybody will understand a child-led philosophy when it comes to supporting autistic kids, but that doesn't mean that we need to doubt ourselves. And I think that there are several ways that we can feel confident that if this did happen again, if this happened to you or if this happened to me again, I know that it would not shake me because I'm confident now and I know enough to know that the approach that I'm using is working. But if you're just getting started with a child-led and neuroaffirming approach, you might still feel like, oh my gosh, that would absolutely wreck me. And listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It really did upset me as well. But I'm kind of glad that they happened because they gave me a lot more perspective into what other people might be thinking when we're using these approaches. So let's talk about the fear that we have that we are going to get called out. Like, I think that even though these things have happened to me, like I just shared, it's not something that happens all the time. And I don't think that it's something that should prevent us from following a philosophy that we feel is aligned with our values and really effective for our kids. And I think that a lot of the time, the fears that we have that people are going to judge us or call us out actually come from our own deeply ingrained perceptions than they do from the likelihood that anybody else is actually thinking them. I think that, in thinking back to one of our previous episodes when we talked about the fact that we've literally all been trained to think that successful therapy for autistic kids is measured by how much we do and how productive our sessions are, how much data we collect, how quickly we get our students to 80% accuracy, all of those things can kind of internalize that idea that good therapy looks a certain way. And I think that that actually is what is making us more hyper vigilant or hyper aware of ourselves and our approaches. And that is what is causing that worry or that fear of being judged. But the reality is that in that, we are actually the ones judging ourselves because we have those deeply ingrained views of what we should be doing or what would be the right way to do things. One of the ways that I've overcome that kind of judgment of myself is by becoming so unshakable in my views and my beliefs about child-led therapy and the neuroaffirming approach. I think that taking the time to deeply understand the why behind my approach has helped tremendously, because when you're confident in something, that little voice inside your head that used to tell you that others are judging you actually starts to tell you that you should help others around you to follow the approach too, because you know that it's working so well. And we all just want to help the kids that we're supporting. And I think that when we know better, we do better. And for me, that has shown up like me wanting to spread the word about this approach, because it's like, I feel that even if somebody was to question the approach now, I will be able to meet them with so much more compassion because I'm able to now have all these years behind me to see how well it has worked and to be able to say, like, listen, I know that it's new or different for you, but here's why I like it, and, go from there, because I do think collaboration is so, so important. So in the rest of today's conversation, we're going to talk about how to build that unshakable confidence in your child-led approach. We'll talk about how to respond when people do question you or your methods without getting defensive. And then we'll talk about how to bridge the gap between what we know works and what others think should be happening. Okay, so we need to talk about why a child-led approach is so valuable. I think that this is like the key to being unshakable, because we need to be fully invested if we want to be able to justify it to others who might be doubtful. Like, if somebody comes to me and says, well, I don't think a child-led approach works, that's not going to shake me, because I'm going to say, okay, well, tell me why you think that. And it's not going to make me question what I know to be true. But in order to not question that, I had to do a lot of learning and unlearning and relearning over the years. The first part in really feeling confident in a child-led approach is doing that work and really learning about the value and merit behind the approach and why it's so effective. Because I do think that that's what's going to give you that deep confidence where you're not going to be shaken up if somebody questions you, and you might even welcome questions. Like, at this point, I welcome them because I really love to have those conversations. I think that the only way to navigate those conversations without that self-doubt creeping in is to be so confident in what we're doing that we don't waver. Because let's just be so real right now. If we don't sound sure of ourselves, then we cannot expect others to trust us either. Before we get into how to respond to those doubts, let's make sure that we're solid on why the child-led approach works. Here's what I want you to do, because I also know from my own experience that just having somebody else tell me that something works doesn't do it for me. And I don't know that it will do it for you either. So I could sit here until I'm blue in the face and tell you that a child-led approach works super, super well with autistic kids. But if you've not done the research and you've not done the work to really commit to it yourself, then, I'm just everything in the world that I say can go in one ear, not the other at that point. So what I would do if I were you and if I had to start over, I would be very clear on the research, because if you feel like you're guessing when it comes to your approach or when it comes to explaining your approach, you really will feel uneasy. So some of the things that I got clear on in becoming so committed was reading the research about autonomy and learning, and how Gestalt language processing and natural language acquisition play a huge role in our autistic kids' communication and their progress. I also would be reading up on co-regulation and all of the other fundamentals that go into successful communication. And one of the most important things I think that we can do, and one of the biggest ways that I learned the things that I know, was by following autistic adults and advocates who have lived through compliance-based therapy and are speaking about the harm that it caused them and the harm that it has done to their self-worth and their mental health. Because the more that you understand not only the science and the research, but also those experiences that people have had firsthand, you'll be less likely to feel thrown off by any criticism that comes your way. The next thing that I would do would be to reflect on what you've seen with your own two eyes. Like, research is great and we need it, and I appreciate it, but real life success is also very powerful. Think about the kids that you've worked with who have thrived when you've let go of demands. And I think we've all seen it with our own two eyes, or else we wouldn't really be here talking about this. Like, I've seen both ends of the spectrum in terms of a really adult-directed, compliance-based approach and a very 100% child-led approach. And I've seen what has worked for my autistic students. And I can remember the difference for those kids in one setting versus another and what that really looks like. So think about it. And even if you have to spend a few minutes just reflecting on your own experiences, writing them down, thinking about has that actually happened for you? Have you seen it be successful? And I want you to also remember those moments where you saw your own child or student engage with you joyfully without that pressure or without, worrying that they were going to become dysregulated because of the demands. And I think by holding on to those breakthroughs, you will feel a lot more secure, because now you've understood and you've gotten clear on the research, but you've also kind of compiled your own wins and your clients' wins, because they're proof that what we're doing actually works. The third thing that I think is so important is to find your community. I mean, just like with anything, if we're trying to improve any skill in life, having a community of people that we are surrounded by is so beneficial. I mean, think about anything that you've tried to accomplish. Like, when you have other people who are also on that journey, it just feels like you don't have to do it alone. And so when you surround yourself with people who still believe that, tabletop drills and compliance-based approaches and goals are still gold standard, best practice, it's easy to feel like the odd one out. Like, it's easy to feel very isolated. And that's another thing that I definitely went through in some of my past jobs, where I felt like the only person who wanted to try things differently or who saw the value in letting kids lead the way, and not treating kids like, I was their boss or they were below me. So when you find other professionals who share your philosophy, it just feels so much better because you don't feel so alone. So one of the ways you can do that is by starting to engage more in these spaces. Like, go onto social media and comment and send messages and reach out to people who are also doing this. Start to talk to the people in your own setting, in your own office, who are either at least open to this approach or who are doing it to some extent, and band together. Like, when you surround yourself with voices that remind you that you're not alone, I think that's when you can really lean in without that fear that you're going to be just kind of thrown to the wolves or thrown under the bus if it doesn't work. I think when we believe in what we're doing, we no longer feel like we have to defend it. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. I might not get everything right, and I don't think I ever will. We're all just trying to figure things out, right? But if I get questioned nowadays, maybe I have this initial little like sting of like, oh, am I wrong? Do I not know what I'm doing? But then it quickly subsides once I realize, like, no, I know the bottom line here, that what I'm doing is effective, and maybe it needs a couple tweaks here and there along the way once I learn something new. But at the end of the day, I think that I don't feel like I need to go to bat to defend something that I have just seen be so effective. And I want you to get to that place as well. I actually feel excited when people question my approach because it gives me the opportunity to share it with them. And then my goal is that they'll also adopt the approach and they'll have the same success and the same excitement that I have as well. So once you start to build that internal confidence, I think that we need to prepare for what might happen in the moment when, let's say, a parent or a colleague or an administrator or a coworker questions what we're doing. Now, the first thing to think about and remember is that most people aren't questioning us because they want to be confrontational or they want to argue with us. I think that most people question approaches because they just genuinely don't understand. It's not what they were taught. It's not what they've seen. It's not what they've done. And just like kids, adults don't like change. And having to learn a new way is not easy. And a lot of people will not want to, and they won't be open to something that's so different from what they've been doing. They might also worry that that approach is not preparing kids for the real world. I think that real world argument is one that isn't actually beneficial because what even is the real world? But people do worry about progress for autistic kids if we're not making them comply. It's like, well, what are they going to do when they get out into the real world? It's like, well, they're going to be confident and they're going to advocate for themselves then because we've taught them how to do that over the years. And the last reason that I think people question us is because they're not really ready to unpack or agree that maybe some of the things that they're doing or have done are not helpful. Because I think sometimes people think that shifting to a new approach means they have to admit that they were wrong, and not everybody wants to do that. I think that's part of the profession. As new research comes out, as new information comes out, we're always going to have to change and update and get with the times, but not everybody is as willing to do that. And so our goal when we are questioned isn't to convince somebody that we're right. We don't need to just be defending something just for the sake of defending it and for being right. Our goal should really be to help that person to understand the why behind the approach. So when somebody questions our child-led philosophy or approach, I think it's important to really remind ourselves that most people are operating in this outdated framework of what therapy for autistic kids should look like. I mean, just like us, they've also been conditioned to believe that progress really comes from compliance, and they're used to seeing therapy that looks structured and controlled and adult-directed, data-driven, and they might not understand that connection and trust really are the foundation of real learning. And I think that, like I said, adults tend to have difficulty with change, just like kids, and being open-minded to a new way of doing things isn't always that simple. Some people are early or quick adopters of new ways. I like to think that I'm an early adopter of new things. If somebody teaches me something and I see its value and merit, I'm not afraid to replace an old way of doing something that wasn't as good. But not everybody is that way, and we have to understand that we have to be compassionate and empathetic to other people's experiences as well. I would wager to say that most adults are pretty stuck in our ways, and so it can be a challenge to accept that maybe there are better, more effective ways to do things. And I think that people also then feel like they have to completely overhaul everything that they've been doing. When we start to move from compliance-based methods, people tend to get uncomfortable, especially those who are a little less than enthusiastic about change. And I think it's because child-led therapy doesn't look like traditional therapy. It looks messy, it's unstructured. A lot of times it just looks like we're playing. But once we've really done the work to learn all of the ways that the approach is beneficial, we know that progress really does happen in those messy moments. And it might not look the same as the progress that we're used to seeing in traditional therapy, but it's usually a lot deeper and more meaningful progress. So let's talk about a few ways that we can respond to pushback with confidence, but also with compassion, which is the route that I feel like is the most effective, because we don't want to just fight fire with fire, right? Like we can't just go into something defensive and trying to argue that we're right. That never works. So I think that we can be confident, but also compassionate if people question the way that we're doing things. So here are 3 simple ways that I think we can respond. The first thing we can do is acknowledge their concerns. So instead of getting defensive and arguing that we're right, something I might say is, yeah, I hear you. It definitely makes sense that you'd have that concern. That kind of response, I think, immediately lowers resistance and makes that person a lot more open to receiving the information that we're going to share. And in these moments, I like to share with that other person what I've personally seen over the years. I think that I also try to make them feel less alone. I might say something like, yeah, I used to think that too, but then, such and such happened. And I might have some kind of like quick, meaningful example. And I think that usually gets people to at least be more willing to hear me out. The second thing that I do is offer a really simple but clear explanation of the why behind my approach. Like, I'm not going to stand in front of this person and give them a 5-page essay on child-led therapy, though I might make a handout or a quick guide that I could email to people if the questions come up, or print out for people and give as a handout. I might do something like that if I need to, but what I like to have is a quick kind of elevator pitch version of why I follow a child-led approach. So I might say something like, we're focusing on connection first because kids learn best when they feel safe. Or, yeah, I follow their lead because when kids feel in control, they actually engage more. And I think the key here is that the response exudes confidence, but it's also just simple and to the point. The third thing that I do in these moments is try to invite others to learn with me, because I want them to feel invested in the approach along with me. Same way that I told you earlier in this episode that I can't just tell you what to do. I need you to really learn it for yourself and see it for yourself. That's kind of what I try to do in these moments as well. I want them to feel invested in the approach with me. So I'll try to offer them the opportunity to partner together to see more progress. So if it's a parent, I will explain the approach, and then I'll say, let's observe together. Do you notice how engaged your child is when they're leading me? If it's a colleague, I might say something like, yeah, I'd love for you to try it with me. Like maybe we can co-treat, or, maybe I can come to your session and I can help you to follow their lead for a few minutes, and you can just see what happens. Because I think instead of telling people that they're wrong, we need to be showing them a different way and be willing to join them and recognize that they're just starting for the first time. They're starting to learn this approach for the first time. They're not going to get it perfectly, and that's okay. We didn't either. So just not making people feel bad for not knowing better. Now, some people will be curious about the approach, but others will be resistant. So how do we bridge the gap between what we know works and what others expect? So I think that we need to start by speaking their language. So instead of saying something like compliance-based therapy is harmful, which I believe will shut down a lot of people and will kind of other the idea. They might think well, I'm not doing compliance-based therapy. And so I think that when we make things so black and white like that, people tend to get defensive. So instead of saying something like compliance-based therapy is harmful and that's why I'm not doing it, I will say something like, yeah, we actually see better engagement when we reduce that pressure and we don't work on compliance. Instead of saying something like, oh, that goal that you wrote is not neuroaffirming, I might say something like, I'd love to talk about how we can shift that goal slightly so that it aligns with how the child is more naturally communicating. Just being mindful of the way that we deliver this information, because we need to meet people where they are, and that's going to allow us to create more open and productive conversations. And that's why collaborating is so important. I will never not collaborate with other professionals, no matter what field they're in, what they bring to the table. My goal is going to be to try to come to a common ground and then allow them to follow my lead as we follow the child's lead. Another thing that we can do is to find a common goal. Even if we disagree on methods, I think something that we can all relate to is that we want the child to thrive. So instead of arguing over what is the right way to do therapy, I think that finding shared values is a great way to start. So we might say something like, yeah, I know we both really want Johnny to feel confident in his communication. Here's how I'm going to try. Or, we both want to help him reduce his frustration, or we both want them to love learning and connecting with people. So finding a common goal and starting there can be really beneficial. And of course, we want to keep showing the evidence. So when kids are making progress, we want to make sure we highlight it. Like, oh, Johnny did all this spontaneous communication today. It was so great. And I think it was because, we followed his lead and we had the pretend microwave. I'm totally not over the microwave controversy of 2015. But anyway, and when a child is more engaged and you're noticing these improvements, you want to point it out, tell people about it. The best way to help people understand a child-led approach is let kids show them and let them lead the way. So we're following the kids' lead, and hopefully with the right mentality and right attitude and right combination of confidence and compassion for other people, we can let other adults actually follow our lead here. You don't have to convince everyone, which is kind of my final takeaway for you. Like, you don't need to be the keeper of the best way to support autistic kids. Like, at the end of the day, you can only do what you can do, right? Like, you can't force somebody to adopt this approach. You can keep advocating and educating, but you can't convince everybody, and that's okay. But what you do need to do is trust yourself and know that what you're doing is effective, and trust that when it's not effective or when you learn a better way, that you will shift and pivot and adopt something new. I think that when you trust yourself and you've really put in the work to figure out why this method is so effective, you'll be able to explain your approach with a calm confidence and simplicity, and you'll be able to handle those doubts without second guessing yourself. And I think that you'll really start to help shift mindsets of those around you without needing anyone else's approval. It's like, we can still do what we know to be best practice, even if another teacher doesn't agree, or another speech therapist disagrees, or whatever the case may be. We can do our best to educate and advocate, but at the end of the day, we need to do what is most aligned with our values, and we can respond to criticism and questioning with confidence and walk away from it with peace, knowing that we are honoring the child in front of us, and at the end of the day, that's what we set out to do. I hope that this episode has given you things to think about, maybe taken the edge off of worrying that people are judging you or are going to question you, or, think that a child-led approach doesn't have room to fit into your setting. I think that we can all continue to shift towards adopting this approach and philosophy. And I would love to hear your biggest takeaways from today's episode. So definitely send me a message, send me an email, and don't forget to leave a review to help others find the podcast if you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for being here, and I will talk to you next week.